Hello, I'm Alex, and welcome back to Tabletop TV. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to paint the ships of the Eightfold Syndicate, a brand new subfaction for Dropfleet Commander. These thieves, smugglers, and pirates are a subfaction for the Resistance fleet, using the same ships, but with a distinctive colour scheme and a wealth of new background, representing their role as the criminal underbelly of the United Colonies of Mankind. Playing the role of the antagonists in the Dreadhold box game, their ships are primarily a battered gunmetal, with crimson armor plates as well, and a sinister Arachnid motif, marking them as Syndicate property. We'll go through how to paint the ships in a moment, but first of all, let's go through a bit of their background, who the Eightfold Syndicate are, and what their role is in the Commander universe. The Eightfold Syndicate is a fractured criminal network united by a shared Arachnid sigil, and ruled from the shadows by a near-mythological figure known only as the Matriarch. Some claim she is merely a phantom, invoked to enforce obedience, but even if this is true, the influence her name and her network commands is unmatched. Born from the vacuum left by war and decay, the Syndicate has expanded aggressively across the stars through deception, infiltration, and manipulation, establishing local underworlds beyond the reach of official law. They feed on corruption. Blackmail, extortion, money laundering, and gambling draw officials into their web. Their malign, volatile influence spreads into the cracks, widened by the strain of war on all colonial systems. Unlike the UCM or their law enforcement wing, the Penal Security Corps, the Syndicate isn't a well-oiled machine. It's a network of cutthroat, ragtag criminals who barely tolerate each other, each running their own operation under the same flag. Some are space pirates, others are more like rogue resistance groups, and a few blend in among the shadows of governments. What binds these disparate crews together is the brand, an 8-pointed Arachnid sigil that marks them as part of the Syndicate. It's more than a symbol, it's a death sentence. Once you're in for good, until death. There's no backing out without blood, and those who try rarely live to see freedom. A handful do make it out alive, rich enough to buy their way into hiding, but even they are usually hunted until found. No loose ends is a mantra championed by the Syndicate. The Syndicate builds its fleets from salvaged or stolen ships, especially older ones which lack security features and are more easily customized. Most are pulled from the battlefields or acquired through black market deals, then stripped down and rebuilt for Syndicate use. Damaged hulls, mismatched parts, and old tech are left visible, giving each vessel a rough, dangerous edge. Regardless of their origin, however, all are painted in the black and red, with an Arachnid insignia. While a few custom ships do exist, sleek, strange, and sinister, it's the repurposed older craft that form the backbone of the fleet. Tough, proven, and modified for ambushes, boarding, and smuggling, they're dirty, patched up, but lethal. For the colour scheme, I've taken the artwork of the Noctum Venator, Atrax's flagship, as the main inspiration. We've seen hints of this ship in the Dreadhold rulebook, and while no model exists for it, not yet anyway, we've got here this fantastic piece of full-colour art to work with. The main colour is gunmetal, with a dark and cool red as a secondary colour. Missile tips and the like are picked out in a brighter, more saturated red, and the other main detail is obviously the white Arachnid spider skull symbol on the side of the hull. We're all going to draw on this and try to make something that's easy to replicate across the whole fleet, and have a go at doing some freehand with that spider motif. The colours I'm going to use are on screen now and in the description, so let's get started. So I've primed the model in black, and I've actually cheesed a bit here. I've then airbrushed it with Tungsten Steel. This is just to save some time, because I don't yet know which panels I want to be steel, what I want to be red, what I want to be black, and so on. You could absolutely do this via a brush. This was just, again, a quick time saver to get the whole model the same colour. I've then given the whole model a pretty heavy wash with, well, black wash applied neat. Because, again, I don't yet know what areas are going to be steel, what areas can be red. I'm doing it to the whole model, even though I'm going to cover a lot of this up later. This is just going to dull it down quite a bit, get into all those recesses, and add some shading in a very quick, efficient method. I'm being quite heavy-handed here, but I do want to avoid it pooling, so I am constantly rotating the model, and if I do end up with an excess pool somewhere, I'll just wick it off with the tip of my brush. There we go, you can see that's really dulled it down, and it has got into all of those recesses nicely. So we're then going to do some dry brushing, and this will be the same method that I used for the Dreadhold. So I've got here a bit of MDF with some texture on it, a bit of paper towel, and I'm going to be dry brushing Gunmetal, the next steel up from Tungsten Steel. So I've got a dry brush, I've got the paper towel a little bit wet, and I'm going to get my brush damp. I don't want it actually wet, I just want it a little bit damp so the paint will come off it a bit more easily and a bit more softly. And I'm going to work almost all of it off on my texture palette, back and forth, rotating it to work it into the bristles, but also reduce the amount per bristle. And then we'll start dry brushing. I am doing this quite softly, I'm holding the dry brush quite far away from the bristles, and I'm going to go over everything because, again, we still don't yet know what's going to be steel, what's going to be red, and so on. And I'm changing the way I do it, so sometimes I'll do circular motions, sometimes I'll do strokes, so I really am trying to cover everything other than the recesses. There we go, making sure I get the top as well, all over. If I feel the paint's starting to dry out, I'll just moisten it again, use that little patch on the paper towel before I go back for extra paint. That'll help save paint to make sure I don't put accidentally a big splodge of gunmetal on a panel. Then I'm going to do the same thing more gently with Supernova Chrome. This is almost the brightest steel colour we do, a really, really powerful colour. I do want to be gentle here because I don't want this to read as, well, silver. I want it to read as a dirty metal with some very powerful highlights. So I'll put a bit of my texture palette again. Don't even need to clean the brush really, just work a bit more paint out of it. Pick up a bit of that chrome. And here I really want to get rid of almost all of it. So I'm going to go back and forth on that texture palette, really get rid of almost all of it. One thing I can do is pick up the texture palette and dry brush the very edge of it, and what was there we go. So I've got this effect of building up on the edge, but it's barely affecting the flat plane, which is what I want. This is basically a very quick, dirty edge highlight. And then you can see I'm really holding the dry brush very far back and very lightly, almost just dusting the edges. Generally, the closer to the tip of the brush you hold it, the more control you'll have, but also the more precise it'll be. Whereas if you hold it further back, you'll get this very soft effect. All this also applies to any other dry brushing you're doing. If you didn't want to do metallics, you could apply the exact same techniques for getting your first colour down very quickly and very easily. Especially on very textured models like Dropfleet models. And there we go, again, that's really picked out all those raised details, and it's added a little bit of an almost sort of patina effect. You can just about see from that gunmetal where I went a bit heavier, and that's really nice. That gives it this really worn look, which is what I want. So I'm now going to load up my palette with most of the colours I need, so I'm starting with black. I'm adding a bit of dark slate grey, which I'll use to highlight that black when I'm done, and then a bit of what I'm going to do for the red. So I've got here deep cherry red, that's going to be my shadow colour. Red rum is going to be the mid-tone. And bear with me here, Halfling Skin we'll be using for our highlight. I'll show you why when we get to that step. Adding some Ospedale Grey, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but that's a nice mid-tone, slightly blue grey, and some Frosted Edge, which we'll be mixing in and using for our freehand. Now I'm going to block in all those black sections, and I think I'm going to do the skeleton of the ship, for want of a better term. The parts under the armour plates are all going to be black. So I'm going to carefully work my way around. I don't want to get any black on the hangar bay if possible. I do want to get all of this sort of skeletal, unarmoured section, just a flat black. It'll probably take 2 coats to go over the steel, that's fine. I'm going to get the casing for the vent cannon as well. The actual barrel will be a different colour, but this section, black, works well. And I'm going to carefully work my way around the broadside weapons, careful not to get it on the parts I want to leave silver. If you need to change down to a smaller brush to do this, that's fine. To highlight the black, because it's all quite small, quite detailed areas, I'm not going to worry about doing any gradients here. I'm just going to pick out the edges of the details with dark slate grey. There's all of the gubbins, all the greebling, the pipe work and so on. I'm just going to catch the top edge with that grey colour. That'll add a bit of visual interest. And then that could be enough. Obviously you do want this to read as black rather than grey. No, we want to. There we go. I could leave it there. I mean, I do want this to read as black rather than grey, so I don't want to highlight it too much. But I am going to come in here with some Ospedale Grey, the next grey up. And again, just pick out the details again. And here I am doing sort of an edge highlight, but it's quite sparing. I'm not being overly precise. I'm just looking for areas where I want to break up the panels a bit more. And being a blue-grey, it'll add a bit more visual interest than just a flat grey, like dark slate grey is. And there we go. It looks a bit stark at the moment, but when we add the red, it'll come together. Speaking of, we are then on to the red. So I'm using here red rum, which is the mid-tone. So I'm going to start now blocking in some armor panels. Now I want probably a balance between red and steel here, and I find it usually works well to cover up one or two panels that are touching each other rather than picking out single individual panels. I'm going to do the middle section on the hangar bay as well, and then almost the entire section here, this dorsal fin, maybe it's a bridge, I'm not sure, but I'm going to do almost all of it red, leaving just a little section of it steel. And again, it'll probably take 2 coats, so that's fine. Let it dry, do a second coat. You shouldn't need more than that. Red rum's a pretty powerful colour, so it should cover quite well. And there we go, that's the base colour completed, so now we can move on to shading and highlighting it. And now I'm going to make up something for panel lining, so I'm going to add a little bit of water to the palette, mix in 1 brush load of black, and I'll then add 4 drops of black wash, mixed all together. This will give us something that's in between a wash and a regular paint, so we'll still have a good amount of control over it. It'll be very low viscosity, so it should flow into the recesses, giving us a good tool for panel lining. And I'll start panel lining. This can take a while, just take your time. Always try to drag the brush toward you, flowing along the recesses between 2 panels, and the paint should flow off the brush into the gap in between. And the paint should flow off the brush into the gap between the panels without too much effort. So you can see here, as I said, I'm always dragging the brush toward me. You never want to be pushing the brush, and that'll help it keep its shape, and also again flow into those recesses. You might want to do 2 coats. I think I do go back and do a second coat on this top panel here because it's a little bit weak. We're going to do the sections in between the steel and the red, as well as in between the red panels where we've joined them up. And there we go, instantly looks a lot better. Now we've got a lot more detail in those recesses, we've got a lot more contrast within that red. And now I'm going to shade that red rum. So I'm coming in here with deep cherry red, really powerful, dark, rich red, and I've thinned it down quite a bit with water to get it to almost a glaze consistency. This means it'll tint the colour beneath it, but it won't replace it outright as it would if I used it neat. And I'm thinking this has got a light source from directly above, so I'm going over every panel that's not facing upward and painting that entire panel deep cherry red. And then if it's a panel that's directly on the side, I'm going to add a bit of shading to it on part of the panel to create a gradient. So here on these panels that are facing diagonally upward, I'm adding a bit of that deep cherry red into the recess, but I'm not going all the way up the panel. I'm adding it to about the bottom half of it, give or take. And I'll then let it dry. Shouldn't take very long because the paint is very, very thin. And then when that glaze is dried, I'll come in and do a second coat. And here I'm going to cover, on the lower facing panels, the whole area again to really darken it down and give us that dramatic contrast. And then on these top panels, I'm now going to cover about 2/3, half of what I covered previously. It's going to build up a shadow in the recesses, but it's not going to cover the entire panel, and we'll get a nice gradient quite easily. And I'll come in and do a third coat. You can go as far as you want here. Eventually it will just be solid deep cherry red, which is kind of what I want on these bottom panels here. And then I'm going to thin down some red rum, that mid-tone again, to once again a glaze consistency. I'm just going to fix that transition there. So on these panels where there's a bit of a line, I'm going to put a very thin amount of glaze on here and just brush diagonally upward toward the top of the panel. The paint will gather the most where the brush ends, so what it'll do is it'll slowly soften that transition. And at first you won't see much of an effect. That's good, that means I'm doing it correctly. I'll put on this thin glaze, I'll let it dry, which will take about a minute, and I'll come back in and do it again. Now, I arguably should have done the panel lining before I did the shading, so I'm going to come back in with that same panel liner and just redo it where I've gone over it with the shading, and just redefine the gaps between those 2 panels. And there we go. It looks much more interesting with that contrast now. We've got some really deep shadows, some pretty good highlights as well. All we need to do now is edge highlight it. So to edge highlight it, I'm going to use a mix of red rum and halfling flesh. Now, why halfling flesh? First of all, the name of the paint doesn't matter. Ignore the name of the paint. Look at what colour it is. You'll see it's a it is a flesh tone. It is a yellowy colour, which is going to increase the brightness of the colour, but it's not going to turn it too pink. If I used white, this would go straight to pink, and the model might end up reading as pink, which isn't what I want. Using a sunny flesh tone can help avoid that. So yeah, mixing 1-to-1 red rum and halfling flesh gives us this nice colour, and then going to go over all the edges, just doing gentle brush strokes to sharpen them a little bit. Now, as with the Dreadhold video, this model is going to be quite beaten up and battered. It is a looted pirate vessel, so I'm not looking for necessarily smooth lines here, which means I can cheat, and I can, rather than worrying about smooth gradients, I can stipple and stab, tap with my brush, and make it quite irregular. which gives the impression of a sort of pitted texture. You can see straight away, this still reads as red, but it looks much, much more interesting than if I used a pink or a white to highlight. Again, stippling works well, so this is sort of tapping with the brush tip to create this irregularity along the surface. I can also mix in some brush strokes as well if I do want it smoother. I can change it up across the model. If you wanted more of a parade finish, you might go for smoother, cleaner lines. If you wanted it really battered, you might completely avoid doing any sharp lines whatsoever. It's up to you. It adds a bit of storytelling, whatever you do. Just working my way around the entire model, I'm only getting raised edges and edges that are facing upwards. I'm not going to edge highlight anything that's facing downwards, because again, I'm thinking of this as having a single light source from above. And there we go, that's added a bit more contrast, added a bit of texture, which you'll quite like. And now I can do a final edge highlight, which I'll show you now. To do that final highlight, I'm just going to mix another load of Halfling flesh into my previous mix to go brighter, pushing it again more toward that yellow or that flesh tone. And here I'm going to really deliberately make this very scratchy and very bumpy. So I'm going to go over, again, all of the upward-facing edges, but I'm doing hardly any actual lines with the brush. I'm just tapping here and there, skipping sections, adding, again, that kind of very bumpy, irregular texture, which really helps sell it as a worn, beaten-up vessel. Nice thing about this technique is it works on basically any scale. Obviously, Dropfleet ships are enormous, but you could apply this to drop zone vehicles, you could apply this to infantry when Battle Zone and Strike Team come out. It's a really versatile technique, and really forgiving as well. It's pretty hard to mess up. Just need to be patient as you work your way around the model, getting all of those raised edges. And there we go. That's the red finish. That's added loads of weathering, loads of age to those red panels, which matches that same sort of patina effect we've got on those steel panels. Now we're going to add some freehand, and this is probably the trickiest step of the whole process. We did some freehand on the PSC ships and on the Dreadhold itself. This symbol is a bit more complicated. The Eightfold Syndicate's insignia is a spider skull, or a skull with 8 legs with claws and holes on the top of it. It's very, very creepy looking, and we're going to try to replicate that on the side of this ship. What I'm going to do first of all is just paint a white or frosted edge semicircle, and I'm going to pick the angle the skull's going to be at. Now I want this kind of at a slightly weird angle. I don't want it to look like it's part of the original ship or part of the original design. This has been added as essentially giant graffiti by the ship's current owners. So a semicircle will create the dome of the skull, and I'm going to very carefully, with a very thin, very small brush, work the brush down to try and frame the eyes and the nose. The other way to do this would be to just paint an oval to do the entire skull and then dot in the eyes and nose after. Depends what you find easier. I find it easier to frame them rather than paint them on. You can then taper underneath the nose down to a jawline, or a top jaw even. We're not really worrying about opacity here. We're going to get the shape right first, then once that's done we can then build up the opacity with additional layers. And I'm going to start adding those claws, so it's going to have 8 in total coming out and extending around it. You will find if you're using a very small brush it will dry out very quickly. If you feel like the paint's starting to dry, it's not leaving the brush easily, just stop, rinse the brush, reset, pick up paint again. It's much easier than trying to push dried paint around on the model and make a mistake. And as for the panel lining, I'm trying to, wherever I can, drag the brush toward me and never push it. You've got a lot more control if you pull the brush toward you. So rotate the model, it can go upside down, whatever you need to do. If it helps, you can rotate the reference image as well, so if you're trying to copy the skull spider symbol, flip the symbol upside down, and you will find it much easier to copy. Should also say, this is probably much, much easier to do if you're not doing it on camera, trying to hold the model very still. Of course, I'm trying to show you what I'm doing, and even here, I'm tilting it toward myself probably a bit more than I should. Once I've got the top 2, or top 4 legs done, I'm going to build out the other 4, which come out as mandibles from its jaw, and then each limb separates into 2 more limbs, giving it the bottom 4. So now I'm going to rinse off the brush, reload it with a bit more paint, and I'm now going to build up the opacity by going over each area again, because I do want it to be a solid, flat, off-white. If you're new to freehand, it can be quite daunting. You can find yourself thinking, oh god, what if I make a mistake? Again, it's easy enough to fix. Any mistake you make, you can just fix by going over the previous paint. If I decided this didn't work, it wouldn't be that much work just to repaint this panel entirely, so be brave, give it a go. It does add a lot to models, and it can be quite good fun when you get the hang of it. If any part of the design does go over the gap between panels, that's fine, just continue on to the next panel, as would happen with graffiti. We can go back in and add some more panel lining afterward. Once I'm happy with the shape, I'm going to come back in with deep cherry red. I'm going to add a couple of extra holes, or possibly eyes, on the dome of the skull. And I'm going to just make sure I redefine the eyes as well if I've lost them a little bit with the frosted edge. And you can see here I've added a spiderweb motif on the underside panel. I'm going to do the same thing again here, and just redefine the line between the two panels that I went over. And there we go. Yeah, doing freehand, it can be a little bit challenging, but it can add so much to the model, so I cannot recommend it enough. Do give it a go, you'll enjoy the results. With that, we're now back to much easier stuff, so I'm now going to block in all of the remaining details with Heatsink Bronze. One thing I quite like to do with my Dropfleet models is do all the weapons across the fleet generally the same colour. I know some people do their vent cannons glowing with a sort of plasma effect, which I could do, and if you want to see a video on that, do let me know. But yeah, for here, I've used bronze elsewhere in the Resistance fleet to define their weapons, so I'm going to do the gun barrel and the orbs on the vent cannon in this very warm, ruddy bronze colour. I find it helps as well to make the weapons a particular colour that I'm not using much elsewhere, because then you and your opponent can tell at a glance what it is. And your opponent will quickly learn, oh, that's a hangar bay, and I can see the hangar bay from the other side of the board, I know that's a carrier, or I can see that that's got a vent cannon, and so on. There we go. So I've added Heatsink Bronze to all the weapons, I've also added it to the hangar bay, I've added a bit at the rear on the engines just to spread it around a bit more, and I've picked out all the little escape pods in bronze as well. And I'm going to shade all of that with an Umber Wash. This is not especially complicated, and just brushing it on, you'll see it instantly flows into those recesses, tinting them, giving us some very quick, easy shading. I'm going to get all the escape pods as well, get all the weapons, get the bits on the engines. There we go, once that wash is dried, you can see that adds all that depth very nicely. I'm going to bring back the highlights a little bit by using Heatsink Bronze again and a fine brush, just to pick out a couple of edges. So some sections on the doors here, the escape pods again. I think they're escape pods, let me know if you know what they are. And I'm now going to come in and pick out a few details with Chrome as well, so all of its point defense lasers. It's got obviously way fewer than a UCM ship, but it does have some. I'm going to find each of those lasers and just do a line of Chrome, which will make them pop. I'm also going to do a scratchy, stipply edge highlight with the Chrome as well on top faces of some of the other metallic areas, just to again get that contrast. There we go, and the model's pretty much complete at this point. I've got two more things I want to do. I want to do a little bit of weathering, so for that I'm going to get Burnt Toast Brown, which is a nice brown with a bit of warmth to it. I'm going to get a bit on my texture palette again. I've then got a little bit of sponge and some needle nose pliers just holding it in place. This is from a blister pack, so if you ever bought resin models, you'll often find you get bits of foam. It's great, keep it, really good resource. Tear it up into an irregular shape, put it in some tweezers or hold it between your fingertips, and then get a little bit of brown on it. You don't want to work most of it off, and then stab your model with it, gently. This is an irregular, random process, but that's the point. We're trying to get an organic result here, rather than us coming in with a fine brush, picking out each individual scratch and ding and micrometeor impact and so on. By using a sponge, we'll get that randomization, which will look very natural and very believable. We'll just go over areas that you think make sense or look interesting. It can go on the metal or on the red, doesn't really matter. You can use it to hide some sins on the freehand as well, if there are bits you're not very happy with. A bit of weathering can help make it look way more believable. But yeah, there you go. And last thing is the engine glow. So what I've got here is a mix of Sea Serpent Teal and Frosted Edge, about 1:1. I'm just going to catch the very ends of the engines. You could be more heavy-handed here if you wanted. You could dry brush this colour around the engines and up underneath that hood that's covering the top engine. But I'm going for a quick, simple, clean effect. So, little dot of that colour, And once it's dried, I'm going to mix some more frosted edge in. So it's probably now about 2 to 1, and do a smaller dot on the inside of the first dot. And I'm finally going to come in with pure frosted edge and a small brush and do a tiny dot of frosted edge in the middle of each of those drive codes. And there you have it, an Eightfold Syndicate cruiser all done and ready to terrorize the shipping lanes. Yeah, I think this really worked. I think the crimson armor plates came out really well. That freehand pushes it that little extra step further and marks it as a Syndicate ship. I think the weathering also really worked nicely. It hopefully shows how just some really scratchy, messy highlights and a sponge can add a lot of weathering and storytelling to a model really quickly and really easily. So with that done, that is the Dreadhold box fully painted. So yeah, we're now ready to film some battle reports. We'll have those coming out for you shortly. And yeah, we'll have more painted videos coming out too, as and when new releases arrive. I know there is a lot planned for 2026. So yeah, if you want to make sure you don't miss any of that, first of all, make sure to subscribe so you get notifications as more videos go up. Make sure to like the video so it reaches more people, and comment below what else you'd like to see me paint, what you'd like to see for battle reports for Dropfleet and our other games as well. Yeah, if you found this helpful, I'm always keen to hear if these tutorials are useful or not. That's it. Thank you again for watching, and yeah, goodbye.